This boy was an incredible skill thief, but he was betrayed by his own group, as the world was being destroyed before his eyes. At death's door, a miracle happened. Regression. Now he has returned to the past at just 13 years old. But with all the memories of the past, this time, he knows every betrayal, every disaster, and now he's gonna change everything. The boy is wounded. People sneer, asking, "Hey, failure, what are you doing?" But two warriors demand he hurry up. He needs to steal the curse afflicting Lord Arthur. The injured boy replies that he's at his limit too, but he'll steal it now. His name is Kraus. He's a failure born into the strongest family. He opens his eye and activates his ability, Black Hood. A shadowy hand emerges from his body, reaching toward a person. It's an ability that can steal curses. He became one of the heroes fighting against the destruction caused by the erosion of the world, a member of the Blue Generation. The protagonist is exhausted, kneeling on the ground. Someone hands a potion to Lord Arthur. Lord Arthur looks up, seeing images of an ancient symbol. He wonders if they are really going to fight the Knight of the Shadow City with so few people. It's impossible. He calls two female subordinates and orders them to approach. They gather close to him. Clash is wounded and wonders about Arthur. He wonders what that man is doing. Lord Arthur declares he's going to end this. Kneeling on the ground, Kraus thinks that since the hope of this world has been extinguished, all that remains is the end. Gritting his teeth, he wonders if Arthur is saying he's going to give up. He wonders if Arthur has any idea how many people sacrifice themselves just to see him make it this far. Smiling, Kraus tells King Arthur that he spent all this time surrounded by allies, and finally, it made him change. A woman tells Clash to be quiet. Arthur did his best. Her name was Sigrun, the third imperial princess of the Aphea Empire, of the Blue Generation. She says Kraus is nothing but useless trash who only knows how to steal things, and he dares not lecture Arthur. With a strange expression, Kraus puts his hand to his head, confused. Useless? He calls it ridiculous. He asks her how she can say that to the person who saved her life. They wouldn't have gotten this far without his ability. He says this while kneeling with his arms spread open. Still speaking, he says that if she doesn't remember, he'll refresh her memory, starting with the beauty over there. She is from the Magic Tower, the red mage of the Blue Generation. He starts to remember her. She couldn't use magic because she lost her voice. She demanded he absorb the curse for her. Even though he was suffering from her curse, she attacked him when he went to get help, and now, her attitude of ignoring people hasn't changed one bit. Beside her is the strongest spear user, Diana, Knight of the Blue Generation, a person who moves without thinking, getting hit by every curse possible. Then she complains, demanding he perform a steal, and the Imperial Princess calls her benefactor useless after he sacrificed his own eyesight for her. He asks if she has any idea how he felt helping her. She targeted him at the academy because he was from the Stalin Kingdom faction. They pressured him endlessly. They used harsh words, calling him a failure, and saying he couldn't even react. He endured it all and healed her eyes, because she was one of the members of the Blue Generation he saved, and he was a talentless failure, a disgrace to the king. He asks then, what was the point of him solving the problems they created all that time? If it were anyone else, maybe. But Arthur should have been able to save the world. Seeing Arthur lead even them and stand at the vanguard of the generation, Kraus decided in his heart to stand by Arthur's side. He wonders why he is giving up so easily. King Arthur says he thinks he can speak now. As he said before, this world has ended, so he will start everything over from the beginning. The protagonist is stunned, thinking, start over? Arthur confirms it. He says it's the first time he's experienced the end of a world, because his ability is regression. And this time, thanks to acquiring the memory inheritance technique, those three can also regress while keeping their memories intact. If everyone can start over with accumulated experience, the probability of avoiding the end of the next world increases. Smiling, with his close allies nearby, Arthur says that's exactly it. He's going to start it all again with those three. The protagonist puts his hand on his chest and asks, what about me? King Arthur smiles, points at him, and says he isn't needed. He admits the Blacktail ability is useful, because it can steal even powerful curses that are impossible to break otherwise. But he asks what the point of regressing with him is. His body and mind are already completely exhausted. Arthur wonders if it wouldn't be more efficient to bring a new version of him. Sad, the protagonist thinks it's as if he were just a consumable item. That man planned to use him and discard him from the start. King Arthur tells him not to worry. He says he will use him in the next world and the one after that too. He says they will meet again. The protagonist says that actually he knew from the beginning. If Arthur really considered him a true comrade, he wouldn't have stood by watching while the Blue Generation ignored him. The others departed. The protagonist lay on the ground, pointed his hand at them, and demanded they take him too, expressing his rage. His consciousness is dissipating due to the accumulated curses. At this pace, his life will end before the world does. He clenches his fist and says, "No way. He won't let it end like this." The Black Hood can steal more than just curses. It works on abilities too. He never tried it on Arthur because it's not as easy to steal as a curse, but it's worth trying. He uses the Black Hood, and his hand goes directly toward King Arthur. Upon hitting him, King Arthur asks if he still hasn't given up. He says he has already experienced countless situations, and each time he left his previous self behind. He asks how many times Kraus must have despaired, but this time it is Arthur who will be left behind. Arthur asks if he has truly lost his mind. The protagonist lets out a smile. A shadowy knight appears. He points upwards and says, smiling, "Maybe." He tells Arthur that this world will only end if Arthur doesn't want to go, so he should try fighting alone, and that the protagonist will save him in the next world. Everything goes dark. A yellow light appears. The protagonist begins to wake up. Upon waking, he yells, wondering if this is the house he lived in as a child. He is now exactly 13 years old. The regression was complete. World erosion, a phenomenon where our reality is literally eaten away by another dimension. When erosion strikes an environment, it warps, allowing species to invade from the other side. Among them are human-like entities known as eroders. Villagers spotted a dragon and called it an eroder. Sister Korea notified the knight's order. Those who rose up against the eroding world were hailed as the Blue Sky generation. The protagonist, whose body was only suited for sealing curses, was part of that generation. He was used as a lightning rod for those curses, then betrayed by his comrades. It truly was a miserable existence. The protagonist awoke in a magnificent castle and let out a scream. "Where am I?" In his head, he thought that just moments ago, it was deep winter in his old life. Looking down at his body, he realized it was now unbearably hot summer weather. If I'm in Azure Pine, where I lived as a child, this must be the final gamble. By using the Black Hood on Arthur back then, I actually managed to steal his regression. He put a hand to his head and laughed. How did I even manage to steal it? The Black Hood is often thought of as a free use ability with no restrictions, but it has a distinct flaw. To steal something, you have to unlock a padlock that appears upon activation. The difficulty of that lock is determined by the value the owner places on the target. Even a simple roadside stone can skyrocket in difficulty if the owner holds it dear. Therefore, things the opponent highly prizes, like abilities, are exponentially harder to steal. The protagonist thought, the higher the value, the more conditions appear, and the difficulty spikes immensely. He remembered Arthur's face and wondered what was going on with him. He knew the Black Hood had activated back then, but he hadn't seen a lock. Hand on his chin, he murmured, there was no lock. That means Arthur really wanted to give up the ability. That Arthur, the hero of heroes, wanted to throw away his regression? Thinking back, Arthur did occasionally show an expression of utter exhaustion. He went through the motions as if just doing chores. If he was repeating a world destined for destruction over and over again, all alone, he probably couldn't maintain his sanity. Perhaps for Arthur, regression was no different than a curse, so he intended to pass his memories on to those three. Were they planning to attempt the regression together? An image of him being excluded by King Arthur and his party flashed in his mind. He realized he had been left behind. The fact that I could steal the ability means Arthur knew he lost the regression and was abandoned in that ruined world. Colliding with the Blue Death Knight's meteor shower means he is dead. He got out of bed. I took the ability Arthur was so desperate to discard. He should thank me. He smiled. I was always left out of the group. They acted like absorbing curses was something anyone could do. They didn't care about a comrade's suffering. With a smile on his face, he said, "Serves you right, you piece of trash, Arthur." In the hallway of the Azure Pine mansion, just before leaving, he looked at himself in the mirror. I'm small, probably around 10 years old. He was short, but his body had decent muscle definition, the result of swinging a sword every day, fighting to survive in the Walheim family, the strongest martial house in the Stalin kingdom. Touching the window, he spoke. "If they want Azure Pine, this must be after the proving ceremony I participated in at age 10, the Walheim family proving ceremony. It was a ritual where one made a pact with a god and was granted an ability, a place to prove one's strength. The more exceptional the contractor, the higher the rank of the god. That's why the direct Walheim line was always prized, but the protagonist was the lone exception. From birth, he had zero ability or talent for martial arts. Then a god chose him, and afterward, he was expelled from the main house. He was sent here to Azure Pine, the dumping ground for failures. Gazing out the window, thoughts raced through his mind. Now only I, the family's biggest failure, know how the world ends. In the end, not even the Blue Sky generation could stop it. Can I stop the world's destruction? He told himself to stop whining. It wasn't about being able to. It was about necessity. If the world is destroyed, I die too. There is no other option. He said this with his hand curled into a claw and a sharp look in his eyes. And the first step to avoid that destruction, a subordinate appeared, calling out to him and interrupting his thoughts. Aliard asked what he was doing in a place like this. The protagonist was overjoyed to see his subordinate. He's still alive right now. The only butler of the Azure Mansion was Aliard. Aliard was the butler who cared for a failure like him, but that poison his brother gave him to kill him. With a manic look, he wondered when they planned to use it. This was the man who forced him to drink poison at age 14, teaching him the first betrayal of his life. A girl was defeating every student present. The evaluators wondered if she was really only 15. They commented that the knights couldn't even touch her. The title of Sword Saint truly wasn't an exaggeration. She was Charlotte, Krause's older half-sister. A man listened to the commentary, noting she was a prodigy that appeared once every 1,000 years. Even the family head had high hopes for her. Apparently, a new lineage had been born. A true genius. Thanks to her, the Warren family would no longer face extinction. Listening to this was Belokin, Krause's older brother. In his mind, he vowed to exterminate that entire lineage, but Charlotte would be too dangerous to confront directly. He still heard the men discussing him, asking if something was bothering him. Another man told him to keep his voice down. Belokin, still in his own thoughts, knew her mother wouldn't be easy to deal with either. That left only one option. That useless defect. I'll start by killing him. Oberon sat in his office, facing the butler Aliard. He asked if the butler was also struggling, noting that the path to promotion had been blocked due to a certain failure. Just one drop of the poison given to Kresh, and the treatment for the butler's daughter, along with his financial worries, would vanish. The butler protested that he had raised Kresh like his own son. How could he lead him to harm? Arms crossed, Belokin questioned him. Are you saying you would choose another man's son over your own flesh and blood? Aliard looked astonished and said no. The next day, the dream came. It was Aliard, dying. His last words were, "I am so sorry, young master." That was the day Aliard was supposed to carry out the assassination before the regression. The butler said that even though the young master was as dear to him as his own son, he wondered how he could do something so unforgivable. Then he died in the dining hall. Unable to bear the guilt, Aliard had consumed the poisoned stew himself and passed away. "The poison your brother gave you to affect me. Who were you planning to use it for?" The protagonist was speaking to Aliard. With a fearful look, the butler asked about the poison, claiming he didn't know what he was talking about. The protagonist asked if he was really going to pretend ignorance. He said Aliard was ready to use it for his daughter's sake. Did he really think the news wouldn't reach him? Aliard's face fell in disappointment. The protagonist sighed, saying if this continued, he'd pressure him again. He told the butler, "Fine. If you insist on feigning ignorance, then so be it." He turned his back, saying that if Aliard hadn't failed from the start, he never would have received such an order. The protagonist thought to himself, a bit worried. Would Aliard blame himself upon learning of his own betrayal? Would he cry or vent his frustration? Instead, the protagonist ordered Aliard to follow him. In his mind, the butler noted how much the young master had changed. He wondered why they were suddenly heading to the studio. Facing a wall, the protagonist ordered the butler to open the way. He said that as the butler of the house, this should be trivial for him. The butler accepted, drew his sword, and unleashed his power. Just like that, the wall was broken. An illuminated corridor with a new door appeared. Having broken the wall, the butler was surprised, wondering if a hidden passage had always been there. He followed, saying, "Very well." Looking at the protagonist, the butler thought inside his head that it was exactly as he suspected. The protagonist was nothing like the person he served just yesterday. He wondered if he had been working all night until dawn. That presence strangely resembled the head of the family. He wondered what had happened to the protagonist. Looking at the padlock, the protagonist spoke. "Don't make me relive the past. After the fire, everything was reduced to ashes. But this time, I arrived before that fate." The butler asked if he should break the chains as well. The protagonist said the butler couldn't break those chains. In his head, he decided he would test his power this time. Black Hood. He channeled his unique ability through his hand and aimed at the padlock, just like that, breaking it. The butler was impressed. The protagonist looked at himself, noting that his skills hadn't diminished. Aliard said it was splendid, and asked if he had made a pact with a higher entity. The protagonist said he hadn't just yet. At most, he had made a contract with some minor deity. As for the library, he told Aliard to report it to his father if he wished. Just the day before, his eyes looked as if he had lost all purpose in life. And yet, overnight, a mysterious contract changed him. He obtained the skills he desired. He carried the same blood as the greatest genius the family ever produced. Although he couldn't rival Charlotte, the current young master was different. The butler called out to him, bowed his head with his hand on his chest, and said that at least until he finished what he was trying to do, he wouldn't attack anyone. The protagonist made a face of contempt. In his head, he noted that this was the downside of regression. Because he acted differently than in the past, the butler was also changing, but the one who betrayed him in the past still lived in his memories. Arthur asked for regression because he struggled with that divergence. In his head, the protagonist figured that if he cured Alliard's daughter, the butler would certainly swear loyalty. Since he was there, he should increase the number of usable allies. The protagonist raised his hand and, feigning indifference, told them to do whatever they wanted. In his head, he decided he would worry about treating the daughter later. For now, the secret library came first. Upon opening the door, a pink light appeared. However, as soon as he opened it a little wider, a fire-like beam came toward him. He had endured countless challenges from world erosion, but the fact that this place gave him chills proved that there was no doubt the secret manuscript was there. He looked up and found it. The secret pavilion archive, the place that recorded every technique and memory without exception, created by the so-called Forgotten One of Walheim. No skills, just human achievements. Manuals destined to reach the supreme realm. Before, it was open to everyone, until a single individual was acclaimed. That individual was the false Damaris, the most underestimated individual in the history of the Walheim family, who was conceived by world erosion and became the strongest of all. The secret manual left by that individual, Fernando, was his. Natlinster took that book with reverence and spoke, "Forgive the delay, ancestors." The family's worst failure became history's strongest individual during his reign of dominance. World-class warriors challenged him. Yet, no one could stop him because he possessed an incredible secret art. World erosion was in his body, and control was in his power. With a book in hand and a happy expression, the protagonist noted that half of it was burned before he could read it. He couldn't understand why Damaris ended up that way. He wondered if Damaris had lost his mind because he couldn't control the void. He looked at him and said that from today on, he could not enter that hall. That was an order. The butler thought that since the young master ignored his mistake, he must repay that kindness. He would refuse young Master Belican's proposal. His master was Kresh. At his desk, Belican tore up papers and slammed his hand down. He wondered why. Irritated, he said that the butler was rejecting his proposal because of that individual. He said he couldn't let someone like him be the family's protagonist. He called him incompetent. That so-called genius and that failure made him very angry. In his head, he thought that if that woman hadn't got in the way, Lilith and he could have protected the direct line. The Lord called a subordinate and ordered him to go to Kresh's hall to assess the situation. He told him to find out why that butler changed his mind. The subordinate said he couldn't get in. He reported that the young master's butler had sealed the entrance to the hall. He was refusing entry even to the head of the house. Belican was impressed and asked if he really wouldn't let the Lord in. He called them arrogant and useless youths. Meanwhile, in the room, the protagonist was concentrating all his dark power. He said he thought he had finally reached the level of an experienced beginner. He explained that there were several stages to mastering Aura. Aura Emperor, Aura Master, Aura Expert, and Aura User. The first stage is Aura User. This is the state immediately after acquiring Aura. The second stage is Aura Expert. This is where most Aura users are. It is also the dividing line between the common and the talented. In his head, he noted he had just reached the realm of the common, but Charlotte was only 2 years older than him. She was almost an Aura Master. She wasn't just talented, she was simply stunning. But even Charlotte, that monstrously talented person, had been powerless. Compared to her, he was still just a different kind of beginner. He wondered if he could really protect the world at this pace. The past version of himself in his head told him he wouldn't know until he tried. He told him not to worry. They couldn't even use aura before the regression and were under adverse conditions, just like before. But now it was different. Even if they couldn't compare to Charlotte, they could grow with the grimoires left by others like them. The two started smiling. They could become stronger. Here wasn't enough for now. Upon leaving the room, the butler handed him a towel and congratulated him on becoming an expert. The protagonist asked what the most important conclusion was. He then asked why the butler was waiting there. The butler said that his fiancée, Bianca, had arrived at the room. In his head, he remembered Bianca, known as the White Lady, the one who became the servant of the World Devourer and sought to destroy that world. He had defeated one of the 10 strongest under the heavens and earned the title. In his head, he noted that now she was just the youngest daughter of the Hardenhalls. He said it was a political marriage. 2 little figures with small labels attached. The Hardenhalls, literary nobles of the North, could easily get rid of the exhausted members of the protagonist's family and connect themselves to the strongest warrior clan. With a forced expression, The protagonist said that both of them were being used by their families. He had actually done business with Bianca, and she went out of her way to travel all that distance to see him. Bianca, the youngest daughter of the Hardenhalls, rulers of the North. Before she was born, her mother was affected by the world devourer. Because of that, Bianca was born without emotions, the condition known as the snow doll. The condition that struck her very soul couldn't be removed, not even by breaking the effect. Her condition also prevented her from making a contract with God. Born under difficult circumstances for her mother, she was a marked child. Bianca was treated coldly. Looking at her dimples, he wondered, thinking it over, if it was Bianca or Diama. He tilted his head, hoping it wouldn't interfere with removing Bianca's condition, because the snow doll condition was essential for controlling the extreme instability of the blood poison. The protagonist asked his butler if his clothes were definitely inappropriate. The butler said he would prepare an outfit for the occasion immediately. The protagonist thanked him and told the butler to ask her to wait in the guest room. 5 months ago, the protagonist shoved Bianca's hand away and told her to leave. He said she wasn't interested in his family's authority anyway. He told her to stop acting like a fiancé. In her mind, Bianca thought she didn't want to be there either. She remembered her father's words. The only way for their family to survive was to rely on the protagonist's family. She had to win over their youngest son. Bianca, he had said, the family's fate rests on your shoulders. She thought to herself, I may not have many emotions, but I can still tell right from wrong. If my family hadn't arranged this political marriage, I would have refused someone so pessimistic and ill-tempered like him. Present day. The protagonist was drinking tea and commented that it was served too hot. He remembered she was sensitive to high temperatures. He would speak to the staff this afternoon. Looking at Bianca, he mentioned the nice weather and asked if she wanted to walk in the garden. There must be many flowers there she hadn't seen up north. Let's do that, he said. He called his assistant and asked them to prepare some cookies for the garden. He told Bianca it must have been a long journey getting here. With a neutral expression, she replied that they were engaged after all, and needed opportunities to talk calmly. The protagonist wondered about that response. He commented that, considering her formal way of speaking, it sounded like she was addressing a superior, not her fiancé. He said this with a slight smile. Bianca thought something felt different. The protagonist used to have a very intense gaze when they met before. He seemed like a different person today. Besides, she never told him she liked macadamia cookies. The protagonist arrived in the garden and commented on how peaceful it was. He looked at the tea, and she confirmed in her mind that he really was Kraus. The two stared at each other. He placed a hand on his head, wondering if he was really so different from before. In her thoughts, she questioned herself and moved on. She bowed and apologized, saying she had said something unnecessary. The protagonist thought she shouldn't be doing that. His memories of that time were hazy. He couldn't remember exactly how he had treated Bianca back then. The only thing he recalled was that expression of hers. It was cold. She wore that same expression on the day she met his son in front of the northern pavilion. Thinking with a smile, he decided he needed to resolve the current situation. He told her he understood why she thought that way. He mentioned having made an important deal. In her head, she wondered if he had changed because of this deal. She said, "Congratulations, Kraus." He said with a smile that he had a proposal for her. She wondered about the deal and the proposal. She said, "I understand. You want to end our engagement." He worried internally, wondering why she would draw that conclusion so quickly. With his hand on his chin, he thought it over. He understood what she meant. She didn't want to marry for political reasons. He understood she would prefer to end the arrangement. In her head, Bianca had self-critical thoughts again. He wondered why she saw herself that way. Then she said she was his fiancée, and the agreement stood. He was surprised by that firm response. In his head, he tried to remember the last time he heard similar words. He coughed and said he understood. Finally, he returned to the main subject. It was due to the ability he had awakened. He wanted access to the snow doll curse. He moved his hand closer to hers, utilizing his dark energy with a smile. In her head, she wondered if he wanted her to hand over something dangerous that few had ever managed to control. She wondered if he intended to draw that energy into himself. He confirmed that yes, he wanted to use that energy. If she handed it over, he would consider granting one of her wishes. Even breaking off the engagement could be that wish. In her head, she analyzed the situation, knowing the protagonist was often underestimated. If that was the case, there must be tension between him and his lineage. Perhaps he was just exhausted from everything, exhausted enough to want to suppress his own emotions. She saw him raising his hand and thought it might be a sign of extreme exhaustion. A scholar had spoken about this once. When people reach their emotional limit, they can go through a deep crisis. Once in that state, they might make drastic decisions. Or they suddenly become strangely calm, as if they were a different person altogether. That is a critical moment. Those actions can be signs that something grave is about to happen to their well-being. The old master had said that if someone close to her became like that, she should offer support. She held the protagonist's hand and said everything was going to be okay, that he could overcome this phase. He didn't need to depend on external energies. He just needed to manage his emotions. The protagonist didn't understand Bianca's words at all. He said there had been a misunderstanding. She said she would visit him frequently from now on. If she asked her father, she could even stay nearby. The protagonist questioned her sudden change of heart. He wondered if she truly disliked the engagement. Bianca said that even so, she couldn't ignore someone who appeared to be in a difficult situation. The protagonist thought she was misinterpreting things. He understood that Bianca was decisive, but felt she was making an error in judgment. If she didn't facilitate access to the curse, he wondered if he should try activating the stealth ability by generating the unlock conditions. The first unlock condition, become close to Bianca. A double block, he thought. He said it was complicated. Since she had this connection from birth, it was intrinsic to her. Usually, these energies shouldn't generate blocks. The other condition to unlock it was getting close to the entity known as the White Demon. That was more complex than the engagement. Since Bianca was very reserved, she rarely showed interest. That said, if he sent her back to her family, it might accelerate the process of her becoming the White Demon. He would keep Bianca close and look for a chance to resolve the block issue. He still thought that if he could stop her from becoming the White Demon and manage to access the Snow Doll, he would solve two problems at once. Keeping Bianca close was the best method for now. He told her that made him content, and he was grateful to see his fiancée frequently. She said he was welcome. She would confirm with her father and return. The protagonist watched her leave in the carriage, and calculated her next visit would likely be in a month. He planned to read as many old records as possible until then. Things were getting busy. The very next day, a carriage with luggage arrived at the Azuri Pine mansion. Bianca had arrived. She said she would be staying at the Azuri Pine house starting today. She formally awaited being under the protagonist's care. The protagonist was surprised and wondered if they would be living in the same residence. He is sleeping right next to Bianca. He opens his eyes and spots her. He asks if she's sleeping there again. He wakes up fully and tells her people might get the wrong idea if they find her here. With a tired look she doesn't understand and just says good morning to him and asks why he is here. He tells her that this is his bed, Bianca. Back in the room, the protagonist is adjusting his sleeve again. The power is currently blue. In his head, he thinks that, come to think of it, it's already been a few months since he started living with Bianca. He has a flashback. She told him that starting today, she would be living in the mansion with him. She said she looked forward to being under his care. The protagonist, startled, asked if she had already moved in. Bianca said yes. There were no issues. Her family gave permission immediately, with a confused look on his face. The protagonist thinks to himself that she is living far from her family and she is still only 18. Perhaps her lack of emotions causes family affection to fade away and leaves her independent enough for all kinds of sacrifices. Well, that might actually make being friends with him easier, with that little chicken there. Coming back from the room, he was controlling his mana. He thinks to himself that it was just summer, and now it is already winter. The year is coming to an end. That means the inauguration of the Academy over in R is approaching. The Academy is an institution established by the Empire and the four great kingdoms. It cultivates talents capable of fighting worldwide erosion, and registration is open for 15 to 20-year-olds. Before his regression, that academy produced the Blue Sky generation, those bastards with their cheat-like abilities. Thanks to those bastards. The antagonist makes an angry face. In his head, he says he knows their weaknesses better than anyone else, so stealing their abilities will be very easy. As soon as he enrolls, he is going to steal everything. His hand covered his mouth as he smiled. He turns 14 next year, so he has a year before enrollment. He needs to get stronger by then, but his talent is starting to hit a limit. He wonders if the initial expert stage is truly his limit with just humans. To break through that wall, he needs to steal an addition from Bianca's Snow Doll quickly. He needs to master poison and that strange essence. Leaving the room, he sees Bianca sitting and waiting for him. He asks if she was waiting for him again. She says yes, and that she cannot leave her fiancé alone. The protagonist thinks to himself that she has followed him like a little bird ever since the summer. She followed him everywhere. He wonders when Bianca will finally come back with a friend. He should invite her out or something. The butler called the protagonist and said an invitation had arrived from the Star Sanctuary. With a startled look, the protagonist wonders if it is the Star Sanctuary. The Star Sanctuary is an annual party held for minors in the Kingdom of Stalan. Barring special circumstances, almost everyone attends. It is meant to promote friendships and expand their networks. The protagonist says okay and thanks him for the explanation. He says in his head that before his regression, he was acclaimed in the Blue Mansion. So his memories from that time are valid. He mentions that guy will probably be there too. He thinks it is worth it. It had to be just to fulfill his promise to Mordor. If he does this, maybe the butler won't do that thing again. The protagonist says he is going, and his fiancée says she is going too. Bianca asks if the partners will likely behave in an authoritarian and explosive manner. They will criticize. He says probably yes. They also don't know what they are going to say to him. Wouldn't it be better if she went home? She says no and is going with him. She says protecting their partner is the duty of a fiancé. She touches his shoulder. The protagonist says he was not asking as her fiancé. He was asking for her sincere feelings. She tilts her head and says there is that look of pity again. For the last few months, the protagonist has been incredibly kind to her. Memories come flooding back of him asking what she would like to eat for breakfast and asking to go to the library to choose her next book. Various things he was doing for her. She appears lying in a lake. In her head, she says it is quiet. She was never treated with such kindness. Not even at her family's estate. It is enough to make her forget her terrible first impression. He was very kind. She does not dislike the protagonist anymore. She tells him that she is going with him, not as a fiancé, but of her own free will. The protagonist's eyes widened, and he was impressed by that answer. They say it's okay. At dusk, they are in a carriage, heading to the ball. The protagonist wonders if that is the Geralt Salon, to rent the most famous tourist spot in the region. He wonders if they just have money to burn. The reason nobles are respected in this world is because they fight against world erosion in the compound areas. And yet, these guys neglect their training to get lost in parties. He wonders if that is the future of Stalin. He doubts he will find many decent guys in sanctuaries. The protagonist arrives holding hands with Bianca. People announce his arrival. People are gossiping, saying they are engaged, and that such beauty was wasted on the dreadful government family. The protagonist looks at the people with a look of contempt. In his head he speaks, mixing in false names. Someone speaks excitedly, saying someone interesting has arrived. In his head, the protagonist says that real nobles exist there too, those who will later join the Blue Sky generation. They are Tiger Boy, Barak, Magpie, and Annex. The three would become known as the three heroes of Stalon. He shakes his head with a face that says he wants nothing to do with it. He says the reason those three are interested in him is probably because of Charlotte. She arrives in the hall and tells the protagonist to listen. Perhaps because she was wearing that dress, many people took notice, but none of them could get close. She wonders if this is a star sanctuary. It is more like trash. She says it was boring, so she is leaving next time. These were the memories of the protagonist in his active life. That was how Charlotte bragged that day. Judging by the atmosphere, she must have already been desperate. Bianca gets close to him and tells the protagonist to ignore the filthy ones. He tilts his head and says he was just thinking about that. They are also bad-mouthing Bianca, but she does not seem to care. She came from so far away and is worried about him. The protagonist puts his hand on her head and tells her not to worry. He does not care. Looking around, he says in his head, by the way, when is he coming? Then Lord Darling arrived. The protagonist thinks to himself, speaking of the devil, he appeared, the strange one among the strange ones. He arrives striking a very bright pose and speaks. Hi, everyone. He is the affectionate lord of the alchemist castle, the dear darling. A person saw the protagonist and noted his body was covered in curses. They asked what had happened to bring him to such a state. The person commented that they wanted him as a test subject and promised a cure. Grabbing his cheek, they pinched it lightly and called him eccentric. Then they announced they would begin. As they started chanting words, the other covered their mouth to interrupt. He asked if they had lost their mind, but stepped away. His name was Darling, Lord of the Alchemist's Castle. That was his first encounter with the man later known as the world's greatest alchemy king. Back in the present day, he arrived radiating happiness. People around him commented on how impressive he was, as always. They asked if he arrived late on purpose just for attention, and noted how eccentric he was. The protagonist thought to himself that someone genuinely seeking attention would never miss a meeting with colleagues. The protagonist grabbed some food from the party buffet and handed it to Bianca. He asked her to wait there. She started eating and agreed. Darling saw the protagonist approaching and thought that boy looked familiar. He felt like he had seen him somewhere before. He recognized it was Kraus. In his head, he noted that he certainly resembled Charlotte, his sister. His eyes showed interest as he asked if he wasn't Charlotte's younger brother. Smiling, he asked if Kraus had business to discuss with him. He wondered if the boy's interest was solely due to Darling's reputation. The protagonist thought that recently he had been looking for information on worldly phenomena. He commented that Darling had sparked a bit of his interest. Darling said he was a provocative and bold young man. Since he had sparked his interest, he warned him he had better be prepared. Darling, looking at the swords, asked how old the protagonist was. He replied that he was 13 and asked if it really mattered. Darling grabbed 2 swords and commented that he looked young, but his presence was something completely different. The protagonist thought that was because he had more experience than he appeared to have and had already concluded his studies. He told Darling he didn't have much time and wanted to get straight to the point if possible. He asked him to explain. Then Darling threw a sword for the protagonist to catch. The protagonist caught the sword and immediately had to block a fast movement. He defended himself. Raising his voice, he asked what Darling thought he was doing. Suddenly smiling, Darling said he had finally met Charlotte's brother. He added that he just wanted to test his skills first. The protagonist tilted his head, confused. Darling restarted the training movements and asked if he hadn't said he had something to discuss. He said he was listening, so they began to converse while continuing the sword training. Darling wondered if the protagonist wasn't considered someone without ability. The protagonist, with a brief smile, said it might seem that way, but he trained every day. In his head, he thought it was complicated to use certain techniques there. Perhaps he would try a different approach. He mentioned the research on neutralizing curses. He said he wouldn't mind helping him with that. Darling wondered what he knew about alchemy. That made him think the boy might actually be useful. The training continued, and they kept talking. Kraus spoke about complex research involving the interaction of different types of curses. It was something few could solve. To become a first-class alchemist, a person had to prove that research. The protagonist stated he would help him with that research. He would use his unique capacity to handle curses. He pointed his hand in Darling's direction. Darling was impressed and thought he was definitely not someone without ability. He said that if what the boy was saying was true, that was the perfect opportunity to simultaneously prove the theory and advance neutralization. Darling asked what he must do in return. Smiling, the protagonist suggested they become exclusive partners in this venture. Darling asked what exactly that meant. The protagonist explained he would be dealing with various curses from now on and wanted him to create the resources to mitigate them. Darling confirmed that the creation of alchemical solutions was his specialty. The protagonist thought that merely dealing with the abilities wouldn't be enough. Certain situations required extraordinary measures to prevent grave consequences. And for cases like his, there was no other choice but to use all possible means, whether alchemical or others. Darling thought that he had heard rumors about the protagonist's situation. He commented that the boy was constantly compared to his sister, but he thought those siblings were a notable duo. Darling asked if he could question something. He asked if he was going to the Lahern Academy that would be opening soon. The protagonist said yes. In his head, he thought the academy had resources worth having. Darling was extremely happy to hear that and said it was great. He would make the necessary preparations. Any challenge involving complex alchemy was more than welcome. He added that, of course, the position of ally beside him was available. The protagonist, listening to that, thought he maintained his intense personality. Probably. He said there was still one more thing he needed to ask. He asked if Darling knew of the discoloration condition. Darling said the condition was considered irreversible and that the skin changed tone, leading eventually to a permanent state. The protagonist asked him to create a solution for that. He was impressed and asked if the boy knew what the word irreversible meant. He said even he couldn't do the impossible. The protagonist didn't like the response and said he trusted Darling would be the one to complete the challenge. But that was a story for the future. Determined, the protagonist pointed at him and said he could do it. Darling said speaking that way challenged his pride as an alchemist. Then the two agreed and formed an alliance. The protagonist said that when the resources ran out, he should contact him at the Blue Mansion. Demonstrating great enthusiasm, Darling said sure, he would deliver personally. The protagonist said that, by the way, there was something that had been bothering him. He asked about the exact nature of their alliance and Darling's previous comments on partnerships. He asked what he meant by all that. Darling laughed and said he was still too young to understand the complexity of adult partnerships. He said he valued talented allies above all, no matter who they were. The protagonist was disconcerted by the intensity of the response and moved away quickly. He said he needed to go, looking hurried. Darling waved and told him to wait, calling him his future business partner. The protagonist, descending the hall stairs, thought that now that he evaluated it, Darling had always been that type of intense person. The protagonist, arriving at the hall, spotted several people gathered. He saw a man holding his fiancée's arm in a bothersome way. The protagonist intervened quickly, separating the man from her firmly. He asked if he was trying to bother his fiancée. He questioned what the man thought he was doing. The protagonist states that it's hard to believe he would attempt to take his fiancée against her will. He questions if the man truly believes that is correct, clearly disapproving of his actions. The man says no, that he misunderstood. He was just following the princess's orders. The protagonist cranes his neck and notes that he said it was an order from the second princess. The protagonist asks if the lady is far away. The man confirms, yes, the the second princess. She said to bring Lady Bianca to her, but the young lady refused, so he tried to insist. He questions what he should do, as it is a royal order. She may be the youngest daughter of the Hardenhalls, rulers of the north. However, due to her situation, Bianca is avoided by the nobility. Yet the princess, who only ever interacts with her own loyal servants, he wonders if she involved Bianca on purpose. And in his head, he says something is wrong. The other connection. Thinking carefully, he remembers one person. He clenches his hand and says it was Annex. That guy was endlessly pestering his sister. After Annex was defeated at the Star Sanctuary, although he avoided Charlotte, he couldn't completely shake his fixation on her. In the end, it affected his mind. Realizing he didn't have the power to beat Charlotte alone, he targeted her younger brother. He sighs and speaks, asking if that's why he involved Bianca in that mess. The protagonist says he will go, but instead of the second princess, he is going to meet Annex. The man who was on the floor wonders why Lord Annex. The protagonist, looking down at him, says that he serves the princess, yet has no idea what she actually requested. He says, geez, he has bad instincts. He takes Bianca's hand and leaves. Walking through the banquet hall, Kraus speaks in his mind. By the way, he asks why Bianca refused to go with him. He managed to deduce the mastermind behind it because he knows what happened before the regression. But at only 12 years old, Bianca couldn't have understood that situation, so he wonders why she refused the princess's order. The protagonist calls Bianca and asks why she didn't obey, and it was a direct order from Priscilla. Bianca says it was because he told her to wait. The protagonist is surprised by the answer and places his hand on her head while walking through the hall. He tells her she did well. Barak starts laughing and says he actually came. The protagonist tells him he came to see Annex. He says Annex said that if Kraus showed up, he should let him in. The protagonist looks at him and says, Barak, the tiger boy. He is skilled, but his unpredictable personality makes it hard to know what he's thinking. He really wanted to avoid getting involved with him if he could. It's lucky Annex left those instructions. Then the protagonist goes to open the door to see Annex. Barak, with a mocking air, says they were also curious about the protagonist and asks if he wants a confrontation. The protagonist, serious, says he knew it would end up like this. He says fighting inside the Star Sanctuary is strictly prohibited. Barak says he had a confrontation with Charlotte there anyway. He asks if it's okay to fight with him too. He says the protagonist seems much less capable than Charlotte. In his head, Kraus thinks that he heard Barak held out longer against Charlotte than Annex did. Both are experts, but Barak is at a slightly higher level. That, combined with an unpredictable combat sense, makes him dangerous. He is the last person the protagonist wanted to face before seeing Annex, but that look in his eyes said he wouldn't take no for an answer. The protagonist clenches his hand and says, all right. Then he makes a quick movement. It was a short impact. Barak falls to the ground. He is momentarily incapacitated. Barak says he is absolutely decisive. The protagonist says it was he who challenged him. He had no choice but to accept. Before continuing, Barak asks if he can prepare better. The protagonist asks if he is sure he can continue. Barak smiles and starts laughing. Bianca, watching this, asks what the protagonist did. He says he used his family's secret technique, short-range impact, a technique created by a former clan member. It generates great force in the shortest possible distance. If the conditions are met, it bypasses defenses and causes a deep impact. It was the only secret technique saved from the Blue Mansion before the incident. Thanks to it, he overcame countless dangers. Looking at his hand, he says he has become more skilled since mastering it. Barak won't be getting up for a while. They retreat. Opening the door, the protagonist sights Annex and a woman. Annex says he is surprised he overcame Barak. He sighs and says it wasn't exactly what he imagined. But since he used the second princess as a strategy, he decided to appear personally. Smiling, Annex says he seems different from the rumors. He asks if they were false. If they said he was unsuccessful, they were true. But if he is defeated today, that will change. The protagonist tilts his head and asks why. He is going to take his ability. If the rumors say he's a failure, then they're true. But if Annex is defeated by him today, the content of those rumors will probably change a bit. They were together from the academy all the way to the Blue Sky generation, his ex-friend. Because they spent so much time together, he knows him very well. For instance, the fact that he only stayed by his side as a friend was because he was useful, and the reason behind that utility was the worst possible one. Flashing back to the past, the antagonist was hanging onto something, almost falling. He asks if everyone was wiped out, calls for Annex, begs him for help. Standing above where the protagonist was, Annex says that if they find out it was his fault they fell into a trap, he'll definitely lose his spot in the Blue Generation. But if he's the only survivor, no one will ever know. The protagonist asks if he thinks it's that easy. The internal power struggles are intense enough already. He will definitely be expelled. Annex thinks to himself that it's fine because he'll just blame the protagonist for everything. Everyone hates him anyway, so it'll turn into a huge scandal, and this whole incident will end up being covered up. Smiling, Anix says thanks for being my friend until the end. The protagonist makes a desperate face and questions his friend, tells him not to mess with him, and asks if he ever considered him a friend at all. He was only tagging along from the start because of Charlotte. Even today, he's distracted because Charlotte is getting married. And that's why this happened. Anix says that's exactly why he hates him. He has no skill, but he has good instincts and is always trying to find faults in him. He says that if Charlotte gets married, then that relationship ends today too. Hand on his chin, he wonders if that isn't for the best. He's sure Charlotte wouldn't want to have a funeral and a wedding on the same day. He says that and smiles. The protagonist calls him trash. In his head, the protagonist says his strength is running out, and his hand slips. He asks if it's going to end like this. Then, just as he was falling, his friend catches him and asks if he's okay. Back then, Arthur's help was the catalyst for them joining the same team, comparing it to the current situation. Now, in his head, he thinks, okay, let's go. That had been the beginning of a new misfortune. Anyway, after Anix was expelled from the Blue Sky generation thanks to Arthur's testimony, it was disgusting to see him trying to marry the princess out of pure disrespect. And now, Anix tells the protagonist that his way of speaking and his face look a lot like Charlotte's. The protagonist makes an irritated face and says that guy hasn't changed at all, tells him not to speak his sister's name whenever he wants, asks if he looks like his sister. Then the protagonist prepares his power and says that's right. Just like his sister, he's the type who never backs down from a fight. Then the protagonist rushes in to attack Anix, but he is stopped by a barrier. Can't even touch him. The barrier throws the protagonist back. Even so, he doesn't fall. He remains standing. And in his head, he says that as expected, he's troublesome. Anix asks if that's it and says he should use aura. He used the secret art of the Gleiser family, the Moku Senda style, a unique secret art that uses aura to freely strengthen and manipulate plants. The technique's limits can be expanded using recovery abilities to multiply the plants. The protagonist reminds him he said to use a weapon, then says fine, he'll fight using the tree branches themselves. Anix asks, so what? Tries to block, can't do it. Attacks again, fails. The protagonist dodges all the branches and advances. Anix moves his head and asks if he dodged and was still pressured. It would be understandable if it were a genius like Charlotte, but for a failure like him. Did he open the eyes of combat or something? In the protagonist's head, he thinks Anix is his natural enemy. He's seen those abilities so many times before the regression that he's sick of them. The protagonist moves in to strike and asks if he's thinking about Charlotte. He says he was silent and listening, but says he's going to teach the protagonist to control his mouth. Then, behind Anix, a giant wooden monster appears. He warns the protagonist to be careful. A woman nearby yells for him not to do that. If that hits Kraus, the damage will be irreversible. The monster delivers a powerful blow against the protagonist. The protagonist remembers that among the books in the secret library of the Azurapine Mansion, there was a particularly thin manual of secret arts. The master of that manual was an ancestor who continued to wield his sword until he was 80, a man without talent who disciplinedly repeated the most common strikes. The manual, written in his final years, was short, documenting only his strikes. But that art required a state of unity between the self and the object, something that cannot be achieved with a brief study of martial arts. Because of the curse, he was pushed into similar situations many times. The protagonist, focused in his head, realizes he managed to understand his ancestor's secret art. The sword finally makes sense. He becomes the sword. Holding the branch, power begins to flow. Then the protagonist delivers a precise blow and completely neutralizes the monster. A true sword, simple and direct. Everyone is impressed by the protagonist's feat. The protagonist points the weapon and tells him never to be arrogant again, asks if he understood. Anix was kneeling on the ground. The protagonist had effortlessly defeated the monster he summoned. He lamented his state. He had planned this out, calculating just enough effort to make stealing the ability easier. But he poured everything into that last sword strike, and now he thought he couldn't move. Damn it. He couldn't even speak. Bianca grabbed Kraus, telling him to let her help. She gave him a squeeze. Darling spoke up, saying the protagonist wouldn't last like that, and told her to leave it to him. Then, he hoisted the protagonist onto his back. He asked what all the commotion was about. People were saying the failure had beaten Anix. Others refused to believe the talentless youngest son could defeat him. Darling noted that the rumors were already spreading. Looking at the protagonist, he asked if he was bold or just empty-headed. Either way, when the kid woke up, he'd be a celebrity. And that look on Anix's face earlier was truly unforgettable. Darlene said she had a feeling Anix would try something after this. She insisted the protagonist needed to survive until he could cooperate with her research. A week had passed since returning from the Star Sanctuary. He was training with his sword, smashing sticks. The protagonist mentioned he had finally recovered from the effort of using the holy sword. If he had used it consecutively to the very end, he would have been in worse state than Anix. He remembered the carriage ride home. He was unconscious the entire trip. Putting a hand to his head, he thought that if he hadn't lost consciousness then, he could have at least finished preparing to steal the ability. He had two methods in mind for stealing skills: the standard method of unlocking the Black Hood, and the method of inducing the opponent to devalue the perceived worth of their own ability. He planned to use the latter on Anix. That method was characterized by being easy to execute if you could overwhelmingly defeat your opponent. Now that the wooden giant had fallen to a single sword strike, the doubt Anix felt should start spreading like ripples. Upon losing to the failure he despised, he would begin to doubt the value of his own ability. The protagonist sheathed his sword. Even if it took time, Anix's recovery ability would eventually be his. That was why he wanted to spend every day of the remaining year before the academy dedicated to training, aiming to surpass those geniuses. As he spoke, a butler appeared, calling for him. He announced that Master Belican had arrived at the Azure Pine Mansion. He figured Brother Belican had reached his limit. The butler informed him that they had already refused his messages 22 times. The protagonist lay down on the couch, saying he couldn't push it any further. He told the butler to let him in. Bianca, ever supportive, gave the protagonist some water. He asked what that was. She told him he smelled like sweat. He sniffed his own shirt, explaining that using aura expelled waste products. In his head, he thought perhaps his nose was paralyzed from being used to the scent of erosion. Bianca asked if he wanted to wash up before meeting Master Belican. He said no, he'd probably just get dirty again anyway. Then she asked him to please stay away from her. Embarrassed, the protagonist asked if she was ordering her fiancé around. Bianca had grown up. She started running. The protagonist asked if she really thought she could outrun him. Smiling internally, he thought of Bianca as a younger sister and couldn't help teasing her. His acquaintances from before his regression would probably look at him coldly now. Arthur appeared in his mind, asking if he was getting soft with all this peace, asking if he really thought the end could be prevented this way. Arthur. The protagonist didn't want to admit it, but except for the very end, he had been a hero who never lowered his guard and was always on the front lines. He wondered where Arthur was and what he was doing right then. The Lord arrived behind him, asking if he was flirting with his fiancée. It seemed he was having quite a good time. Belican entered the hall. The protagonist said everyone needed to blow off steam occasionally. Internally, he thought about how this man used to be so afraid of him, he couldn't even make eye contact. Now he was looking straight into his eyes. The rumors that he defeated Anix were actually true. The protagonist remarked that despite how guilty Belican must be, he still had time to come to their father's Azure Mansion. Belican asked what the guilty party meant. The protagonist said he heard Lawhern Academy decided admissions via exams, regardless of status. Smiling, he suggested Belican should prepare too. Belican wondered if his brother was provoking him. He let out a laugh. The Walheim family existed on a different tier than other houses, so much so that not even the strongest empire in the world, Olitalka in the Stallone Kingdom, interfered with them. He was a true direct descendant of the family. Belican thought, was he telling him to prepare for the academy exam? He told him not to get arrogant just because he beat someone like Alex. Belican said that was a funny joke. It was natural for a common person to worry about getting into the academy. The protagonist agreed, saying he supposed so. Belican covered his mouth, revealing the real reason he came was to deliver a request. He was summoning him to stop the erosion occurring at Mount Gerlach. Confused, the protagonist asked if family missions weren't supposed to be mandatory only after age 15. Belican told him not to worry. He had been assigned to accompany him as a guardian. Surely his younger brother who defeated Alex wouldn't be intimidated by something of that level. In his head, the protagonist realized Belican was trying to test him and keep him under control. Anyway, he was more accustomed to the world's erosion than a peaceful life. Trap or not, he had a plan to get out of it. Bianca asked where he was going. He said he'd be away for a while to deal with the erosion, and asked her not to be lonely without him. Bianca replied she wasn't planning on it. She said it made no sense for a 17-year-old child to deal with planetary erosion. It was absurd. Everyone was impressed by her response. The old man called her a cursed snow doll. The protagonist grew furious, declaring she was his fiancée. He was sure his generous brother wouldn't accept such words directed at a 12-year-old child. Belikin became indignant and left. Satisfied, the protagonist placed his hand on Bianca's head and told her she did very well. She asked him to please not collapse again. Motivated, the protagonist agreed. He said he would be fine. World erosion, a phenomenon where the world is corroded by another dimension. Sometimes erosion species appear. Other times the environment or the world itself is affected. If the erosion continues, that place can become another dimension entirely. The protagonist and Belikin arrived at the erosion site. Belikin wondered how much he had trained in the Gorilla Mountains. He mentioned hearing it was a 3-star erosion. He said the purification team had said something and wondered about it. His subordinate spoke up, saying they would begin as soon as they finished dealing with theirs. 3 stars, huh? The protagonist thought. An experienced intermediate-level knight should handle this easily. Besides, his brother was an advanced specialist, despite his looks. Defeating the Lord of the Eroded Land shouldn't be a problem. Belikin called for Kraus. He said the reason he brought him here was to let him gain experience. With a fake expression, the protagonist said, "Okay, brother." In his head, he thought, experience? Who do you think you're talking to? He followed him and realized he was being pressured for some reason, to test a temporary solution for the attack. Several beetles appeared and the guards got desperate. They said it never ended. The protagonist told them that this was a dangerous species. He warned that direct contact caused adverse reactions. He ordered them to cover their entire bodies with wool to avoid risk. One of the guards was impressed and asked if the protagonist had already experienced world erosion. The protagonist said he was only 13. It would be strange if he had the chance to get close to world erosion. Belikin heard that and thought to himself, it's because he's a failure and is acting so arrogantly when he's just starting in erosion work. 15 years ago in the erosion zone, his pride had been challenged. He wondered how the protagonist had the audacity to advise knights. It was completely different from when he was there. He told them not to put his name on the same level. Belikin was furious. He grabbed his sword. He started fighting the beetles. Hypothetically, if Kraus grows up with Charlotte and surpasses them, then will the family's failure be his? He wondered. The protagonist called his brother. He said they would soon reach the Lord's location. Belikin said he was lucky, and it seemed easier than when he went. It seemed there was no one else corrupted there besides the Lord. Nistro spoke up, saying that was even more reason to stay alert. He said there was a 3-star lord who could maintain the corruption alone. The guards were very scared. Belikin told them not to be so frightened. He ordered them back. He said they shouldn't be scared by the talk of a simple child. He said it was only 3 stars and they would finish soon and go back. The protagonist thought, okay. They would manage on their own. He would concentrate on what he needed to do. As he advanced, the protagonist's eyes widened. He said he could see the aura of erosion in the environment. Since mastering the extreme vital control technique, everything was clearer than before. He took something in his hand and said all that was left was to swallow it. But when it came to real combat, he got nervous. The protagonist swallowed and felt a strong malaise. The knights asked if he was okay. He said he just stumbled. Let's go. Belikin said he was trying too hard for the first time. He said he could carry him if he wanted. The protagonist, coughing, said it was fine. In his head, he said this was why he mastered extreme vital control. He closed his hand and thought, first, according to the secret text on extreme vital control, mix your aura with the erosion energy and absorb the aura. The aura circulates infinitely like a great river. If you absorb the erosion energy, eventually the aura will fuse completely with the immense river, creating a new color that cannot be repeated. The protagonist wondered if that was the result of the derangement. No sane mind could withstand that. Perhaps it was time to use that forbidden art. After Damaris was sealed, it was believed to be lost to history. But one day, a blind ancestor discovered the secret library. Because he was blind, he couldn't read the grimoires, so he reluctantly closed the door to the secret archive, but he decided to leave one grimoire behind, to prevent someone like him from finding it. The name of the grimoire was Aura-Based Extrasensory Perception, a technique that feels all sensations through the aura, the 6th sense. Currently, he could only extend it to his fingertips, but that was already enough to completely recognize where he was. The place where he was now was not a world covered in erosion. The protagonist observed and thought that the erosion had decreased. He overcame it with his 6th sense. Of course, this wasn't just a stalling measure. Absorbing energy that corrodes worlds means danger at any moment. If that's the case, he still needs Bianca's snowdoll curse. But even as a temporary solution, it doesn't change the fact that he can handle it. This time, he managed to grow another step. The protagonist noticed something behind him. It was a monstrous creature with several faces, right in front of him. Horrifying. Everyone around them was terrified. That was the thousand-faced demon. Belikin ordered everyone to get ready for combat. The Lord gripped his sword. Everyone was combat ready. A magnificent power enveloped Belikin as fire erupted around him. The protagonist was awestruck. The knights began commenting on the display. They spoke of how magnificent the Lord's Ignis was. Whenever it flared, it was blinding, and its destructive power was immense. It was an ability that incinerated anything it touched. He remembered how that power had once wounded his own arm. A flashback surfaced of a time when the North treated him poorly. Barreau had declared there was a vast difference in their power now. He claimed he had no time for an inferior being like the protagonist. Snapping back to reality, the protagonist called out to his brother. Things were completely different before the regression, he thought. But what about now? He hoped his brother hadn't changed. Both unleashed intense auras, priming their power. The monster loomed right beside them. Suddenly, a knight was struck by a strange status effect. What kind of curse is this, the knight wondered. They realized even the lords were struggling against the eight-armed beast. Apprentices like them had no way to avoid the curse. If it came down to it, their only option was to run. Belikin unleashed a devastating flame attack, engulfing the monster. "Don't give up!" he shouted. "I'll create an opening." The knights were awed by his raw power. As expected of the Lord, they said, the monster couldn't even counterattack. Motivated, they vowed to follow him. Inside, Belikin wondered if his brother was watching. Had he been defeated already? He wasn't there. Then he spotted him behind a rock. He's just staring at the thousand-faced demon, not me, Belikin realized. Belikin pressed his attack. The monster reacted violently. Every single one of its faces seemed to writhe in agony from the impact. This is an emergency, he thought. This pace is dangerous. What is this impossible pressure? They had to defeat the thousand-faced demon right now, before more abnormal phenomena occurred. He ordered all knights to attack the demon. He had fused his own attack with aura, yet he wondered why it hadn't worked. He yelled for the knights to focus before the next attack became even deadlier. Then, something inexplicable happened. He looked back and saw all his men standing there, unarmed. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "It's the thousand-faced demon's curse," he realized. It hit them without even touching them. His thoughts were interrupted. He touched his face and realized he was gravely wounded. "I've been hit," he thought. "This is bad. I'm going to lose." Despite his injuries, he charged. "Why is this happening to me?" he wondered. "I am the strongest in the family. It's because I made mistakes. I was surpassed by my younger brother, my junior by 3 years. Someone who bluffed until he lost all his knights, and then ran to save himself. Because he failed. This is the end." Belikin lunged to strike the monster, but failed. But the protagonist managed to carry him to safety. Belikin was exhausted and wounded. "Why is my brother helping me?" he wondered. The protagonist, happy and panting, realized Belikin was alive. He had been watching from afar the whole time. When he saw Belikin hit by the demon's attack power, he avoided direct confrontation, grabbed him, and escaped the area. Belikin insisted he was fine now and could walk alone. The protagonist retorted, wondering if Belikin really shouldn't rely on him, considering his body couldn't even use aura right now. The Lord irritably grabbed his sword, insisting he didn't need help. He looked around, asking if the thousand-faced demon was still nearby. The protagonist didn't know. They had walked quite a distance, but hadn't left the zone. This meant the world erosion couldn't be stopped. He knew they couldn't leave without defeating the demon. The protagonist then mentioned a secret art that guaranteed victory, something he learned from their sister Charlotte. It was the reason he could resist Alex in the Star Sanctuary. The Lord questioned Charlotte's secret art. He noted that she harbored special feelings for the brother born of the same mother. "Are you saying you can defeat the thousand-faced demon with just that art?" the Lord asked. The protagonist confirmed it. Instead of avoiding the demon and getting lost in the erosion, it was worth trying. He extended his hand to his brother. "I know you might not trust me," he said, "but trust in our sister's ability." His brother agreed that Charlotte was a genius, but warned that if they failed, they were finished. The protagonist smiled. "Relax, I definitely won't fail." The protagonist tells his brother, the demon's son, to rest up his strength. He asks if he is ready. The brother conjures fire in his hand and says yes. The protagonist declares that they will begin. A blue aura begins to flow around his body, channeling directly into his sword. The Lord observes that incredible disk of concentration and the aura surrounding him. He had never witnessed an aura so pure before. When he previously asked him to flow the flames of Ignis like Charlotte's secret art, he honestly had his doubts. But that aura was at a level he could never reach, no matter how hard he trained. He wonders how he is doing it. The protagonist calls to his brother and orders him to activate the power on him. His brother unleashes his power, and he becomes engulfed in surrounding flames. Belikin asks if anything happened. The protagonist says no. adding that it seems he will arrive in time. After all, there's no need to keep waiting for him. Balokan becomes indignant. He says his fire burns like electricity, something his own never achieved. That blade will likely defeat the demon. His subordinates were instantly defeated, and he could do nothing but flee to save his life. If his brother manages to defeat the demon of 1,000 faces, he wonders if that means he is inferior. Then the protagonist charges, attacking the demon of 1,000 faces. The attacks were intense. He succeeds in defeating that demon. His brother, watching it all, is impressed. Suddenly the sky clears and the sun appears. With a happy look, the protagonist looks at his brother and says it is over. Balokan says he did it effortlessly. Desperate, he starts laughing and launches an attack against his brother. But nothing works. He wonders why the ignition wasn't working. The protagonist says he is grateful, and that now he will be able to discover exactly who he is. Then, the protagonist begins to use his stealing power. The unlock requirements for Balokan to voluntarily grant a portion of Ignis to a target are admitting that the target controls Ignis better than him and the complete defeat of one's pride. Everything went exactly as the protagonist planned, so he could steal the power. Then the protagonist advances against his brother and delivers the attack. The instant the blow lands, the Ignis power becomes the protagonist's. His brother is defeated and vanishes. The protagonist surveys the scene and speaks. In the beginning, he really hoped they could get along, but regardless of his efforts, that wish never came true. Because of his brazen malice, he still clung to a shred of hope. Perhaps because they were brothers, he might eventually acknowledge him. Unfortunately, it seems that was never an option for him. He asks if it hurts. That time he injured him, the protagonist felt immense pain, something similar to what he feels now, probably. The protagonist observes his brother's defeat and starts to laugh. He looks at the sky and comments that the weather is ironically pleasant. In the main state of Warren, someone wonders if Lord Balokan's night order has been destroyed. The erosion has increased to 5 stars. They say it is a level requiring top-tier experts to manage. Without Lord Balokan's sacrifice, the protagonist would not have returned unharmed. People are gathered at Lord Balokan's wake. His butler is devastated. He asks what they are saying, if they are calling the failure the sole survivor. The head butler tells them to watch their mouths. That is the brother Lord Belok gave his life to save. They cannot let the Lord's honorable death be in vain. The protagonist thinks, observing this, that it seems they believed his story. He probably doesn't need to worry about it anymore. Thanks to his brother, he achieved incredible results in that expedition. Now he can utilize the extreme poison technique, and he confirmed that it is possible to mitigate its negative reaction using the 6 senses. Through Ignis, he even unlocked the black flame. Ignis is an ability that can incinerate anything. He tested combining it with the power of world erosion, but never expected such an effective result. Thinking about this, he closed his hand and said that the black flame possesses a power beyond his expectations. It will serve as a strong trump card. The color is a bit sinister, but it works. Now, the only remaining problem in the main house is the investigation of the anomaly at the world erosion site. So far, they haven't determined the cause. Even though it is actually the work of water eaterism, the true body of the eroder sleeps in an eternal dream, unable to see reality except through the eyes of his lackeys. The protagonist opens the door and thinks to himself, if they have already started moving, it means they might find the lackeys sooner than expected. A woman spots him and says he finally arrived. She was waiting. She was Saphira, a 4th-class investigator from the erosion investigation. Kraus gets nervous and thinks to himself, that black star. Smiling with his hand on his head, he thinks he didn't expect to meet her so soon. Saphira looks confused. The protagonist says he wants to make a deal with her. He will remove her mortality. She gets interested and asks if he is a regressor. She had been looking for something for a long time, but she never expected to receive such a surprising prize as that one.